All right. Hello. This is Module 2, the PowerPoint for Module 2, and it's entitled Critical Thinking and Critical Theory. And this is the module, this is Chapter 2 of our book, Is Everyone Really Equal? And so this module in here, what we're going to discuss are what does it mean to take a critical perspective about a topic? And then the second thing that we're going to talk about, or that I will lecture on, is what does it mean to think critically about social justice? Okay, so critical thinking involves more than knowledge acquisition to determine which facts are true or false. It entails determining the social, historical, and the political meaning that are given to facts. So remember in class, I told you that one of the things that I want us to be cognizant of is that I'm not going to try to tell you what to think, but I'm going to help you to start thinking about what you're thinking about while you're thinking about it. And then we know that's metacognition, but also I want us to start pushing ourselves to thinking critically about it. Like, what are the social, historical, and political meaning I'm giving to anything that I'm learning or anything that I think that I perceive that I know? So when we think critically, we challenge the beliefs that knowledge is simply a result of rational, objective, and value. It's in a value-free process. We have to know that all knowledge is situated in social, historical, and political times, and that because of that, it is never neutral or objective. It's always situated in something. So thinking critically requires the ability to recognize and analyze how knowledge is socially constructed and how it's infused with ideologies. And then if you refer back to Module 1, where we talked about like how we're socialized, well, we're socialized into a belief system or belief systems that sort of say this is something that we accept or something that we reject. But we have to also realize that any knowledge that we acquire, it is socially constructed and it is infused with the ideologies of those who have socialized us, okay? So we don't just acquire knowledge and it's value free. It is not. It will never be value free. It is always of the importance for us to know that knowledge is socially constructed and it's situated in politics, history, as well as the society in which we live. So there are two dimensions of thinking critically about knowledge. Knowledge is not factual, nor is it neutral. It evolves over time and is dependent on the historical context and cultural reference point that society accepts at a given moment. And if you recall, I think I shared with the group who had the face-to-face class. Remember way back in the early 20s and 30s, it was truly a belief that women could not go into the workforce. And so during that time, most women were stay at home. It wasn't until after, the world wars that women had to go into the workforce. And then women's right became, a result of a lot of that. And so now we believe that it is just as fair for women to be in the workplace as it is for men. We're in some places we're now fighting how do we as women get compensated equally or equitably for the same jobs that men do. But the belief about women at home as stay-at-home homemakers is no longer a belief that all in society takes on as true. Okay, So knowledge is always dependent on a point of reference that society accepts at a given moment. So then there are two dimensions that the authors help us to think about when they posit that we should think critically. First, they say the acquisition of new information that challenge our beliefs. That's one thing that we should think about. And then they say that it's also important for us to think about the meaning that is given to that knowledge. The first dimension of thinking critically, we should first seek new knowledge about other societies and their contributions. So when we are given particular knowledge, and school is a place where we often come to learn new information. So when we're given knowledge or when we're learning new information, we should always ask, okay, where's this information coming from? Whose beliefs are being served? Whose voices are not heard in the conversation? Is there another way of looking at this? And so when we start thinking in that regard, we don't just accept all knowledge as factual and complete, okay? And then the second thing that they help us to think about is that what meaning are we giving to that knowledge? The second dimension that we think about is when we think critically is we have to ask questions about the social and the historical context of that knowledge. Like, whose interest is this knowledge serving? Who's the person in position or power that who's making the decision? Who's saying that this is true? And can we find other references that may say that this is partially true, but not completely true? Okay. Why is this important? Because, as we said, we've been socialized into developing beliefs and ideologies. And we have to understand that when we accept theory or knowledge or whatever it is, that we have to realize that our actions or the things that we do in classrooms when we become teachers or current teachers, we have to realize that those things are guided by our belief systems. And those are our worldviews, like how I see the world. So that goes back to this the circle of a multicultural self. When we look at that, those ways that I identify or the intersection of all of those identities, they sort of help me or inform how I see the world, okay? So our actions, as I've said, they're guided by worldview. The way that we make sense of the world, it's often invisible to us. So how do I make sense of, say, a man in his 50s marrying a girl who is 12? Well, I might not think about that, but I have opinions about it. And it's until I start thinking critically about my reaction or my feelings about it, I would not know that it's guided by how I was raised, those beliefs that my parents, grandparents, the church that I attend have informed my worldviews in regards to that. So it's often that the way that we see the world is invisible until we start thinking critically, like, why do I have, why am I for certain kinds of marriages or not for certain kinds of marriages? Why do some things offend me where others do not? It's until we start thinking critically about how we have been socialized or the worldviews that we've internalized, then we can open our minds to seeing the world beyond our limited views, okay? We cannot address issues of critical social justice without first examining the maps that we're using to identify the problem and to conceptualize a solution. So we have to constantly do that introspection of self. How do we locate the problem? How do we see it if we do consider it a problem? And then how do we see it individually as well as how do others see it collectively? And if we see it individually, we might take one course of action whereas a collective thought may take a different course of action when we respond to a problem. So the way we make sense of the world is guided by our world theory, and we cannot address these until we first examine the map of how we identify a problem. And so I'm going to pause right here because I want you to do an activity for me. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a second, and I want to share something else with you. So if you will, in your module 2, there is this social group membership profile. And what I want you to do is I want you to complete this membership profile. And I also want you to go back and look at your circle of multicultural self, because that'll inform this as well. Okay? So when you're completing your social group membership profile, what I want you to do is I want you to label your identity that you're going to use to complete your affiliation with a certain group. So when it comes to race, there's a group that you belong to. So for me, my identity factor in that would be Black or African American. Ethnicity, I'm not Hispanic. My gender is female, economic class, middle class. We've talked about these. And then what I want you to do once you finish this, I want you to look across these numbers. Which one are you most aware of? Which one do you think about the least? Which one gives you privilege? Now, you can have more than one of these identity factors that give you privilege or things that limit you. So you can put more than one number in any one of the columns as well as the rows, okay? So I want you to do that in regards to how you conceptualize certain things, okay? All right, take a few minutes and complete that. Okay, now we're back to this. When we think about knowledge, so our circle of multicultural self is one way of looking at it. Our social group membership profile is another way to look at how we obtain knowledge, or what we consider as factual or objective, if we consider knowledge ever in those two ways. All right. If we were in class, what I would have you do is I would have you turn and talk about your social group membership profile and share some of that with others in regards to the ways that you've been privileged, limited, those that you think about most often, those that you do not think about at all. But since we're not in class and this is a virtual meeting that we're discussing, you may want to take a moment to just jot down your thoughts in regards to that activity, because when we do meet again face to face, or if we have like a virtual Zoom, then we can talk about this information on what you wrote, okay? All right, let's switch and let's look at how do we construct knowledge. And I want you to just say something. Do you agree or disagree with this statement that knowledge is objective, neutral, and universal? Do you agree with that? Well, critical scholars, they question the idea of objectivity. They say, they wonder, can this even be possible? And why they say this is that knowledge is socially constructed. The meanings that are reflected in the values and interests of those who produce it. So the meaning that is given to any form of knowledge is always reflected in the value as well as the interests of the people who produce it. So key elements of critical scholars is that social injustices always result or it involves claims that particular knowledge is objective, neutral, and universal. So if you sort of said that knowledge is objective, neutral, and universal, then social scientists or social scholars would not agree with that statement at all, okay? They would posit that they have the position that all knowledge is connected to a social context, okay? Meaning that knowledge is socially constructed and it's reflected in the value of the person or the group of people who produce it. Critical scholars also guide others in the examination of the relationship between their frame of reference and the knowledge that they accept and that they reproduce. So there may be statements that say certain things are right or certain things are just or certain things are fair. And it's situated in how your frame of reference informs the way that you would think about it, okay? So let me see if I can think of an example. Oh, let's go back to my example about the middle-aged man marrying a 12-year-old kid. Well, my frame of reference would say that that is not acceptable. But there are some cultures, as well as there are individuals who find no problems with that at all. And so when we think critically about something, we have to analyze our knowledge claims and how we position it as how it's presented as objective, neutral, and universal. Because is anything ever universal? Like, would anyone ever agree on anything all the time? That's pretty hard to think about. I don't think so. All right, critical scholars, another way that they help us to think about knowledge construction or to critically examine what we accept as factual is to do a critical self-reflection about your social perspectives and objectivity. So where does my belief about a middle-aged man marrying a 12-year-old kid as wrong come from? Well, I think it comes from my beliefs about Christianity. It's situated in that. Like, to me, something is wrong with that, right? Like, why would someone of that age want to marry a kid? So when I start thinking about why does that situation give me pause, it's because of my social upbringing, which goes back to the ways that I've been socialized, okay? Now, because I can think critically about my thinking about that and see the perspectives of others, I can validate their claim as one way to view it, whereas I can validate my claim as another way to view it, okay? The third thing for us to think about when thinking critically, and these authors help us to understand, is that we have to develop skills with which to see and analyze and challenge ideological dominance. And so my example of thinking about looking at different perspectives on an issue is that's what we do when we challenge or analyze things that are perceived as ideological dominance, okay? In this way, as educators, we can teach from a critical perspective that guides our students in examining their frames of reference for how they accept knowledge as well as reproduce it. So knowledge construction, as a summary, is socially, politically, and historically situated. And then the way that the ways that we accept or reproduce knowledge is based on how we are positioned in this world, and that's situated in how we have been socialized, okay? And this is called positionality. Positionality asserts that knowledge is dependent upon a complex web of cultural values, belief, experiences, and social positions. So now that you have done your social group membership, I want you to go back, and we've been doing this, and I've been having you reflect often I want you to go back on and look at your social cultural self as well as your social group membership profile. And I want you to think about what are the messages that you get or that you have gotten from society, as well as your family, as well as any institution about ability or not having ability, whether it's cognitive or physical. And I want you to jot down some thought. What are the messages that you get about that? Okay. And then I want you to also reflect on, what do you accept as true? What do you challenge as flawed? And then how do you use that information through your daily interactions, okay? So I want you to think about that and then jot down some notes, because when we have discussions, I will ask you these kinds of questions, okay? So Banks explains that knowledge we create is influenced by our experiences within various social, economic, and political systems. So that's what he calls the web, like all of the things that inform who we are. So our social position or our positionality in this world, which goes back to those circle of multicultural self and social group membership forums. If you look at that, he says that that explains how we create knowledge and how our experiences of that knowledge is situated, okay? So the recognition that where you stand in relations to others in society shape what you see and know and come to understand about the world. And so he gives us, in chapter 2 of this text, he gives us 5 types of knowledge. And this will be the last thing that I share with you in regards to this chapter. He says that there is personal and cultural knowledge. Personal and cultural knowledge refers to the explanations and the interpretations that people acquire from their personal experiences in their homes, with their families, and their community culture. Then he says the second type of knowledge is popular knowledge. And popular knowledge refers to the facts, the beliefs, and the various characters and plots that are institutionalized within television, movies, and other forms of mass-mediated popular culture. So this could be through songs, through social media. That's popular knowledge, like what is acceptable. Then he says the third type of knowledge is mainstream academic knowledge. And this is sort of like what I'm doing right now. Mainstream academic knowledge refers to the concepts or the paradigms or the theories and explanations that make up the traditional established canon and the behavior and social sciences. This type of knowledge is based on the belief that there is an objective truth and that with the right procedures and methods, it is possible to obtain truth. So when you go into like a science methods class, that's sort of like what is being portrayed in mainstream academic knowledge. And then Banks says that there's a fourth kind of knowledge, and it's school knowledge. And this refers to the facts and the concepts presented in textbooks, teacher guides, and other aspects of formal curriculum that's used in school. It refers to the teacher's interpretation of that knowledge. So what does the teacher go about teaching? So very much like what I'm talking about right now. So my understanding of critical knowledge is saying, I want you to think about what you're thinking about while you're thinking about it, and then try to ask yourself, why are you thinking in that regard? That's thinking critically and analyzing knowledge, right? So I'm trying to help you understand that. So what you're getting in my doing this is a form of knowledge called, according to Banks, school knowledge. But the ultimate goal is transformative academic knowledge. And this is where I hope that we will be throughout this class, that transformative academic knowledge refers to the concepts and explanation that challenge mainstream academic knowledge and it expands the canon. So what I want you to do is don't just accept everything as truth and the end all be all. I want you to question it and think about it and who's being served by it or not served. And then constantly ask those questions, because it's through these questions that the idea that knowledge is never, ever outside human interests, perspectives, and values. And so if we go about doing this transformative knowledge, then we will expand the collective body of all that we know. And then we will take in more, because we will see that there's more than one way to look at a situation, and there are more than one way to present it in text or in curriculum, and to do it from a standpoint where all who have contributed can be added, so that we get a more complete picture of anything that is learned. Okay? So that's knowledge construction. That's how we get it. We get it through lived experiences, through mass media, through attending school, through what we've always accepted as curriculum. But the goal is to just transform that into a broader understanding of what it means to be educated, okay? So last activity that I want you to do is this. And so if you will do this and we can bring it to class, that would be great. If you're on my online class, if you will do this, and then we'll form a Zoom meeting where we get to talk about this, this will be great. So what I want you to do is I want you to choose a newspaper article or a textbook passage or anything like that, okay? And I want you to then identify which of the various forms of knowledge is manifested in the text. So like we talked about those 5 forms of knowledge, look and see which one is manifested in the text. And then I want you to tell me how it was manifested in the text, okay? This is one of those group discussion kinds of activities, okay? So that's chapter 2, thinking critically about knowledge, what it means, and how do we construct it, and is it really ever universal, neutral, and factual, okay? All right. This Banks knowledge typology, we will look at that in module 3. All right. That is all that I have for you.